Hey, Safe Harbor, I want to take just a moment today to challenge us to think through again what we heard last Sunday in our sermon and to think about how we can be applying that. And I hope we've already been thinking about it, but I want to take some few minutes to refresh us on that. So this past Sunday we learned about what a successful marriage is according to God. We looked at 1 Peter chapter 3 and the specific ways, specific roles that God has given to men and women, both equally valuable to Him in His eyes as His creation, and yet we know that God calls us all to different things. And so part of that includes the marriage relationship, and so we want to be faithful to live out who He has called us and made us to be as men and women, as husbands and wives in marriage, so that we glorify Him and represent Him in the way that He calls us to, and not in the way that we feel or that we think is best, but what He says is best. And so just to summarize 1 Peter 3, in the same way, wives, submit to your own husbands, so that even if some disobey the word, they may be won over without a word by the way their wives live when they observe your pure, reverent lives. And so we see this, we've already been talking about how we are called to submit, to follow the leadership of authorities that God has put over us and things like that. Well, here in the husband-wife relationship, it's also lived out as the wife follows her husband's lead, as she submits and desires to go along with the way that he is leading the family, but also to provide input and advice and things along the way in helping him to lead well and to live, most of all, to live in a way that honors Christ, really, which is the way of all Christians, a humble desire to follow God in whatever we're doing and to put others above ourselves. And so the wives can live that out. You, if you're a wife, can live that out by helping your husband lead well in your family. But then also for husbands, it says in verse 7 that husbands in the same way live with your wives in an understanding way as with a weaker partner, showing them honor as the co-heirs of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. And so we see in verse 7 that husbands, you are called to honor and value your wife, to see her as a precious creation of God and a gift to you, and to lead with that in mind. We talked about how we're called to lead knowing our wives well, and knowing who they are and what they value and what they fear and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, so that we lead them in a way that honors Christ as well. And so we see the design, the picture of how God has called us to interact as husbands and wives, knowing that what He says, His way is best. And so this week, let me just challenge you. If you're a husband or if you're a wife, pray about how you can be more faithful in living these out in your marriage. If you're a wife, how can you better honor your husband and his desire and calling to lead your family? How can you come alongside him and support him and work with him in that? If you're a husband, how can you better honor your wife and value her, and treat her as God's precious creation in your leading of your family? How can you think of her above yourself in some of the ways you're trying to lead, and lay aside your own desires for hers? If you're not married, let me just encourage you and challenge you to look around the people that are around you that are married or thinking about marriage or talking about it, and just think about what God says as you come into those conversations, as you try to encourage and help people and let others see Christ in you and speak the truth of Christ to them. And so let's just resolve this week to be God's instruments when it comes to marriage, whether we're in marriage or not, to live that out, to speak the truth of His word, and know that He blesses what He says is true and good. That's my prayer for you. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you soon.